Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to speak about this topic. What I think is the best way to manage the webinar is I'll say hello on camera so everybody can see me. Then I'm going to shut my camera off so you can focus on the slides throughout the presentation. At the end, there'll be contact information on how to get in touch with me or follow me on social media. And I will turn the camera back on so that we can interact again. So with that said, I'm going to shut my camera off and begin the program. All right, so why it's more important than ever to avoid holiday debt. I'm going to reintroduce myself, so for you get another moment to get yourself ready for the webinar. I am Leslie Tayne. I'm super excited to speak about this topic. I'm very passionate about credit and debt matters. I am the founder and managing director of the Tayne Law Group. Our main office is in Melville, but we do have offices normally in the city, Westchester, and connections with our up-counsel throughout the United States, so we are able to help clients all over and internationally as well. We are a debt solutions law firm handling consumer and business related debt and alternatives to bankruptcy. So we don't do any bankruptcy work here. We specifically work with consumers, business owners, individuals to work out their debt related issues with their creditors. I've been in this field well over 20 years. I started out as in-house counsel to a national debt company, and about 20 plus years ago, I started my own practice to specifically focus in this particular area to provide trustworthy and reliable resources for those who are seeking to resolve their debts with their creditors. I wrote a book called Life in Debt, A Fresh Approach to Achieving Financial Wellness. I believe very strongly that being debt-free, while that's a nice goal, isn't always realistic, that it's super important to understand that you could live with your debt and learn to love it and have it work for you. I feel very strongly about that using the right financial tools can help you get ahead, and sometimes debt is a financial tool that helps you get ahead. Certainly we've seen that in the area of education, in housing, in transportation, so you can learn to live with and love your debt, and that's what I wrote about in my book, Life in Debt. And I speak regularly on this topic. Again, not only am I very passionate about providing quality information that's out there. If you've researched the issues of credit and debt online, you'll see there's so much information. A lot of it is, frankly, misinformation and difficult to understand. So I put myself out there to be an influencer in personal finance in order to provide the best possible information for consumers who are looking for information on resolving debt. So as you can see, I speak regularly for all different kinds of outlets, and I'm called upon by many, many journalists on a daily basis to talk about my experience and certainly my knowledge with credit and debt. So today, our webinar, we're going to be discussing the importance of avoiding holiday debt, how to create and stick to a holiday budget, and preparing your finances to start in 2021 on the right foot. So this is a very challenging time for all of us, and the importance of holiday budgeting is a priority this time of year, but now more than ever, it's been a really rocky road to get to the place that we're in. And with that said, you should have already been rebudgeting since March. And I have been speaking on this topic about debt and COVID throughout the last 7 months. And one of the important points that I often make is that when times are challenging as they are, and when the financial world seems uncertain, it's more important than ever to re-examine your budget. And now we're going into holiday season, and I myself, I'm starting to be bombarded with all these opportunities to buy early. And the question becomes, what am I able to do, and what are you able to do this holiday season? And the reality is that you might not be able to do much, and that's okay. This is a really unusual year, and it's okay right now to say you can't do it. So the first step is, I always say, is awareness. Becoming aware of your finances, being in touch with it. And you cannot make a plan if you're not in touch and aware of what's going on with your finances. So what has happened over the last year? Have you been consistent with your income? Has your income been consistent? Have you been able to reduce debt throughout the year? Have you had some challenges where you or your significant other had a loss of income? Have you been able to save money by moving back home or reducing transportation expenses? Like, what has happened? And now's a really good time to take a look at that. Where have I come from and where am I going? And while that might seem global, it is. And to make specific budgets, and here we're talking about holiday debt, but specific budgets for particular events, let's say it's a wedding or it's a holiday planning or travel planning, whatever it is, that is a microcosm of your bigger picture. So in order to be able to do that, you have to have a bigger plan. So that plan comes from your main budget. And some important statistics to note is that 22% of Americans believe their holiday spending will leave them in debt. That is not a great thought process. That's like almost a quarter of the people, so 1 in 4 people almost. That's not a great thought process, that right now I'm going to spend so much in the next 6 weeks that by January I'm going to be in debt. That's basically what you're saying if you're fall within that category. And that's not a financial thought process that will benefit your budget, and it certainly won't benefit your financial goals. So if you feel that you fall in that category, that you're going to end up in debt, I'm here to talk to you about ways to trim that back a little and create boundaries, have a plan, and leave yourself at least in a fighting position. So 49% of consumers say that concerns around their household finances mean they will have to keep a stricter budget this holiday season. But that's true. And that's true all the time. So concerns around finances always mean that you have to keep a stricter budget. It means that you have to stay on top of your budget and look for ways of reducing expenses. I have been stating since March, and I've spoken on the Savvy Ladies and in other programs, that if you have not done so already, it is time to cut out every single thing that is completely unnecessary and unused, because now is the time to create cash flow. And that means a stricter financial, being stricter with your finances and a stricter budget. And so that may mean that 49% is not even realistic, that it's actually probably higher than that, but that's true. If you're concerned about your finances, you have to be stricter with your budget. And that's going into the holiday season now. We're going into it, and the question becomes, what are you going to do to create cash flow and create the ability to do what you want to do during the holiday season? 19% say they plan to buy more Christmas products on credit this year. Well, even though I am a debt resolution attorney and I regularly renegotiate credit card debt, I'm not one of those personal finance experts that states that you should not have a credit card and you shouldn't use it. I completely believe in the use of credit cards, and the use of credit cards to purchase things that you need for a lot of reasons. One, you could get points. 2, you build and you can manage your credit effectively. 3, it's a little bit of buy now and save later, especially if you get 0%. There's so many reasons why I really love a credit card as a financial tool. However, if you use it as a weapon to stab yourself, then you will find that you will have significant challenges with managing the credit card debt, because a credit card is a double-edged sword. One side of it is this nice, smooth side that works for you. The other side of it really is jagged and can cut you very deeply. So remember that when you're looking to avoid holiday debt, if you don't have the cash flow and you look to use your credit, you want to be aware of the type of credit that you're using. So again, this is part of your plan. When you're going through your budget and you're figuring out how much income comes in, what your debts are, and what your expenses are going to be for, let's say, November, because we're in the beginning of November, what your expenses are for December, what your expenses are going to be for January, those are called projections. And you can project and have a basic understanding of what expenses you're going to have. When you use a credit card, you should know the billing time frame on your credit card. So if you purchase today, when does that show up? When are you required to pay? Are you required to pay in December, or does your billing statement turn over so that you actually don't have to make that payment until January? So be aware of how to use your credit card effectively to avoid interest and to avoid placing yourself in a difficult financial position where the balance is reaching your limits. If you use it effectively, then you can project to pay that off with your holiday budget in January with the income and cash flow from then. What I don't recommend is basing your budget on what ifs. So what if I get a bonus? What if I get that raise? What if I get that job? So those are not the best ways to effectively budget. You need to budget based on what is, not what may be. What may be then gets factored in later when that becomes what is. So keep in mind that using a credit card is totally cool. The question is, how are you using it, and how effectively could you use it for your holiday budget? On average, credit card debt is around 15%. That's pretty high. Most people, it's actually higher than that, 19, 24%. Yes, sometimes you can get 0%, and I do see 0% offers, but you generally have to have fantastic credit. And in order to do that fantastic credit, I'm talking over 740. So if your credit is under that, you might be receiving potential offers, but that doesn't mean that you would be given that offer or awarded that offer. They do a credit check, which is a hit on your credit, and to determine that. Balance transfer is the same scenario. If you're going to use balance transferring for your holiday purchases, keep in mind that some of those financial products may not be available by the time you need to do the balance transfer. Given what's gone on with COVID, banks are going to reassess their risk tolerance. That means their lending tools. Who are they willing to lend to? How are they willing to lend, and why? And you might be asking yourself, Leslie, we're talking about holiday budgeting. What does that have to do with me? But it does if your plan is to use credit card and financial tools to pay the bills later on, because those financial tools may not be available, or they may not be available to you. So again, when we're looking at budgeting, I am a really big fan of the real picture here. So this is what comes in, this is what goes out, these are my projected expenses, and this is where I can budget to determine what I can purchase for my loved ones and family members, or if you want to make donations this time of year, and so forth. You might have, again, been able to adjust your budgets from your travel spending or other things to reallocate those funds, and that's totally cool. You can reallocate from what was your travel budget this year into a holiday spending, and maybe even see that you could spend more. But in order to figure this out, you have to understand the plan and how you're going to pay for it. If you go on the thought process that you're just going to use your credit card and charge it, and then whatever happens, you know, you're going to be faced with a bit of a mess and a challenge, and you're just going to make it more difficult for you to budget. And really, in reality, you're going to look at it like you don't want to deal with it. And I totally understand that. So what ends up happening is if you create a mess, you're less likely to try to fix that. So if you could avoid making that mess now, that's super important. So avoiding holiday debt, cut back in unpredictable times. We are still in a very unpredictable time. Even a week ago, when I was doing some interviews and we were talking about, we had no idea who the winner of the election was going to be or projected to be. The question was, how do you manage when you really don't know what's going to happen? We are still in a super unpredictable times, even though the energy feels more positive. We now have a direction of a new administration. We also have a potential light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic, with a potential vaccine, but none of that means that things happen overnight. So even though we have a new president taking over in January, and we have a potential vaccine that should be out, what they're claiming to be out by around that time, that doesn't mean that all of that trickles down and impacts us, because it does take time. So times are still very uncertain. And with uncertain times and unpredictable times, it's more important than ever to keep your budget really tight, re-examine it on a regular basis, and trim everywhere you can. Get rid of things, trim your list, and be honest with your family members and say, listen, last year I had a great year. This year, my year wasn't as great. And as a result, I'm not able to do what I did last year. I'd like to find a way for us to exchange gifts and love during the holiday season without putting pressure on me and my finances. That is a more than reasonable conversation to have with anybody, including Secret Santa type of exchanges that you've worked with in the past, or even participating in holiday. I've seen some interesting holiday parties that are online that you have to pay to join, like even $30 to be a part of it. that may not be in your budget, and that's okay. And it's really okay to tell somebody that it just doesn't work with your budget and just say no, even though you don't necessarily want to say no. And that really has to go to the accountability piece. You have to be your biggest advocate and your biggest coach, and sometimes your biggest critic. And you have to hold yourself accountable and say, hey, you know, how much am I spending here? What am I really doing? And I tend to get carried away this time of year too. I get all excited about all the things. My children now are, I have twins that are 20 and I have a daughter who's almost 23, but I still get all excited about all the things that I'd like to buy for them for the holiday season. And then I say to myself, Leslie, what are you doing? First of all, they're like adults. They don't need, you know, A, B, C, and D. I don't have to give them as gifts like I did when they were little, and they don't expect it. And two, it's just not necessary. So sometimes I have to have like a discussion in my own head and say, Leslie, what are you doing? And I encourage you to do the same thing, that when you're looking at purchasing, because I too am getting all those advertisements now, and I'm getting excited about, you know, who I'm going to buy what for, and I'm starting to add this stuff up in my head, and I'm saying to myself, this is going to be an insane holiday season if I just let this go. Even though I want to buy for them, I really do. And I know you want to buy for your family too, and your friends and your significant others, but this is not the year to do that if you've faced challenging times or you're still facing uncertainty. I can tell you that the job market next year will be equally as uncertain as it has been over the last year. And I wouldn't rely on government programs or potential relief projects. I just wouldn't. I would be very realistic and practical about what you have now, and talk to yourself, as I talk to myself this holiday season, about what really is going to work with my budget and what isn't, and what just makes sense. Because sometimes in the past when I would go to the mall, I would say to myself, what am I doing here? Why am I here? This is just a place that's going to make me spend money. And if you find yourself in those places that just make you spend money, leave. And that's the awareness piece I talked about. But also know what you could spend. So if you find that you're going and you're going to do something like that, say, okay, I have X amount of dollars and that's what I'm going to spend, and then I'm leaving. But that requires discipline and accountability. So let's get back to basics. What is a budget and how do you create one? The first step in creating a budget, and I'm a little old school, I still like to write things down, is I make a notation of what month it is, and I write down all my potential expenses. So it's November. I write down my mortgage, a car payment, any insurance payments, the cable bill, the whatever is coming up this month, credit card bills. This month I had some unexpected bills. I live out in the suburbs, so I had to shut my sprinklers off. So there was a $60 bill for that, but I didn't anticipate that ahead of time. So now I have to add that into my budget. I'm using these as examples because you too might find yourself in a situation where you didn't anticipate a particular expense this time of year, and that has to be accounted for. So when you're creating your budget, I write all of this out. I'm still, like I said, old school. I write it all out and I put the dollar amount, my expected expense for the month, and then I look at my income. How often am I being paid? What kind of income can I expect this month? Is my income going to change for any reason? For example, your income might change because you've hit your tax level, so you might find more money in your paycheck this month if you've hit all your contributions. You might find that you have less because you've decided to add to your matching plan at your job. There's a lot of reasons why your income can go up and down, but you're on average, you want to write out how often you get paid, and then you have to do simple addition and subtraction. You add up all your expenses, and you add up your income, and then you subtract the expenses from your income, and that's what's left over. And at that point, if you find yourself very close to zero, then you have to go back to that budget and say, where in this budget can I rework my expenses and why? And then you start thinking about your holiday budget. You write out, of course, who you want to buy gifts for. Donations are coming up. It's a great time of year to make donations to charities. Consider doing that as a gift to somebody. Make a charitable donation in somebody's name. That would give you a tax deduction, which would benefit your tax returns next year, or possibly make an impact depending on the size of that, but it's a deduction, so that actually benefits you by doing so. Be creative about the gifts that you give this year, and take a look really at who you're going to buy for, and what you can realistically budget. And if you find that you're in a position where you really can't meet those expenses, then it's time to have that discussion with your family members and otherwise. So as you can see from this slide, this is not my handwriting, but exactly what I do. I write out my monthly expenses. I write it all down. I add it up to my total amount of expenses, and then I subtract that from my income. And I can determine from there where I can cut. Now, when we look at this particular budget here on the left side of the screen, you can see there's an others. And I generally like to know what others means, and I would write that out because $1,200 in others seems like a lot. $550 in travel. I'm not sure if that's like real travel, like travel vacation, or if that's travel like car expenses. So again, in your budget, you'll know what the line item means, but you might want to break that down for gas or public transportation if you're using that under your travel or your car insurance. And the same thing goes for others. I really don't like generalized categories as a rule, because then you can just lump things in there and you really don't have an idea of what you're spending on. You could try to renegotiate with your cable company. You can try to find ways to reduce your expenses in groceries, electricity, obviously. That's something that you can try to reduce the expenses by balance billing and keeping your electricity at a reasonable amount, or having more cost-effective items in your household appliances in your house. There are ways to cut those expenses, and they really do make a difference. I mean, if it's cold, put a sweatshirt on. You don't have to turn the heat up. And that's the line I tell my children all the time. I'm sure your parents told you that too, that if you're cold, put a sweatshirt on. So it's just a way to save money, and while it may seem trivial, it really does add up and it makes a difference. And so I encourage you to take a look at your monthly expenses and be more detailed than what you're seeing on this screen, because again, like insurance, $1,250 a month, I'd like to know what that includes. Is that car insurance, household insurance, renter's insurance? Is it life insurance? I mean, are there things in there that you could show to insurance people to reduce that? I mean, there's a lot of ways to re-examine some of the expenses to reduce those particular expenses. So staying on track, definitely shop early. I mean, kind of get it out of your system. Now I'm like chomping at the bit because I get excited about all the emails that I have. But again, I say to myself, what ends up happening is at the end, once I've bought what I wanted, then I see other things that come around in December and I say, oh, I want to buy this and I want to buy that. So you have two options. You can try to stay on track. You can ask a significant other or somebody else to purchase for you, so you're not that you are not distracted. I use a particular email address where all of my promotions go to, so that it doesn't mix in certainly with my work or any other social use, so that I don't get distracted by those. I know that if I open that email box up, I know that those are where all the promotions are. So if I want to stay away from it, I can. Use budgeting apps and tools, super important. I mean, you could use Intuit's Mint, which is very popular. Even your bank credit card company's app can definitely provide budgeting tools. I recommend strongly that you try a few different ones if you're finding that the old school way of doing it doesn't really work for you and you prefer something more electronic that reminds you of payments due. I mean, some of them can be very detailed, and depending on your level of use, can be super helpful in terms of creating ways to spend track your spending and alerts to stay on track. So starting 2021 on the right foot, one of the concepts of debt is borrowing, and they generally go hand in hand. What I'm discussing in this particular thought process is to avoid loans. Now, you could argue that a credit card is a loan, and it is a type of loan because you're being lent money in a way on a shorter term basis, and that's true. But the instinct of most people is to go to a loan to get themselves what we call a clean slate, or to consolidate reduce their expenses. But what ends up happening is those consolidation loans, if it's not looked at very carefully, you're simply robbing Peter to pay Paul. So what that means is that you think in your mind that, oh, I'm going to take the 5 credit cards that I have and the personal loan, and I'm going to put it into one loan. It'll be a lower interest rate. I'll pay it off, and all will be good and well. That's great. One, there are closing costs, so there's an expense related to any kind of loan. Anytime you borrow, there is an expense related to it, even though it might say, or they might tell you, there's no cost for the loan. There may be no cost up front, but there usually is a cost for the loan. Lending is not free. So the question is, how much is it costing you for that loan? In addition, you might find that even though you've now taken this loan, you still don't have enough cash flow to meet all of your obligations. So you start using credit cards again. And that is the biggest problem with taking loans and borrowing without properly looking at your budget. If you're going to consolidate and take out a loan, then the rest of your expenses should all be easily paid for with cash. And that includes being able to put money away in an emergency fund, which again is super important, which we've seen over the course of this past year, how important emergency funds are. But if you're going to think that you're going to borrow to save yourself, most of the time what ends up happening is if you don't budget properly, then you'll find that you'll supplement and you'll end up with this new loan and credit card debt, and then you'll become a client of mine because you'll call me up and say, I don't know how this happened. I'm going to tell you how this happens, because 9 out of 10 times it's because it wasn't budgeted for. And you thought by just looking at the payment and just looking at the interest rate, it was a great deal. But you didn't take a look at your budget to determine how it fits in your budget and whether you could pay all of the other expenses that you have in your budget using your cash flow without leaving yourself with $0 in the bank. So, continuing that thought process, creating an emergency fund. I just touched on that a little bit. Like I said, we've seen more the use of emergency funds over the last year than ever before. Why should you have one? Well, I'm not necessarily telling you to have one because as soon as we have a situation like this, that you just immediately go to the emergency fund. Emergency funds are really great because on an emotional level, it will help you sleep at night. You will know that you have X amount of dollars in the bank, and that will cover you if something happens with your income. And that amount should be between 6 to 9 months, and ideally you should have a year. Think about how long we've been managing in this pandemic, and frankly, it's not over. And they're talking about some additional restrictions in the next 30 to 60 days. Like I said in the beginning, that vaccine is not necessarily going to be widely available in the very, very near future. And by very near future, in the next 30 to 60 days. And as such, you have no idea what to expect. So you want to be able to hold yourself over as long as possible. Your emergency fund is a line item in your budget that is an absolute must. And that doesn't mean that you use your emergency fund for holiday spending. That's not the most appropriate use of that. But sometimes if you don't have this emergency fund, you will use your credit up, and then once you use your credit up, you have nowhere to turn, and you end up with a tremendous amount of debt, and you won't be able to borrow because your debt to income ratio will be off and you have no open and available credit. So be aware of that. Be also aware of how the CARES Act provisions that you might have taken advantage of are going to be impacted on your budget coming in January. Remember, the student loan forbearance programs are ending, and mortgage relief programs, which were 6 months and can be extended another 6 months, potentially can end for you. And the eviction moratoriums will end at some point. I can tell you that they are just chomping on the bit to get to that. But that will end in 2021. So be aware if you've taken advantage of those opportunities or you're in forbearance programs, that those programs are going to end, and you need to be prepared in your budget. So if you spend a lot during the holiday season, November, December, and you all of a sudden have to go back to paying your student loans in January, remember that you're going to have an added line item of expense, and you don't want to be caught short with that. So be prepared. Do not let your emotions get control of your financial behaviors. These are business decisions. Honestly, personal finance is like a microcosm of a business. It's your personal business, and you have to be able to approach it from a business perspective. What is the best way of managing it? If you were running a business, would you make these decisions? I understand want and need and desire. I completely do. I live here too, and I'm not immune to it, even though I am a debt help attorney and a financial attorney, I'm not immune to it. And that's why I say, and what I wrote in my book was that it's okay to have debt as long as you manage it. But don't start out 2021 on the wrong foot. Start out on the right foot, that you're prepared with your budget, that you're prepared to adjust your budget when needed, you're prepared to pivot, and that you have money in the bank. I can tell you that money in the bank right now is more important than anything else that's imaginable aside from your health. But money in the bank should be the #1 priority when it comes to your short and long-term financial goals. It is really important right now to create a situation where you have a cushion and you can feel really good each day going into work or looking for work or pivoting your life. You will not miss out on anything if you don't buy in the current sale, because every store always has sales, and there'll be after sales and all kinds of other things. So if you miss it now, then you'll get it later. So I try to, again, I use these lines to myself because I sometimes get these ads and I really love shoes and pocketbooks, right? So I say to myself, but where am I going right now? So if I don't buy that now, because I really don't have a lot of use for that, even though I go to work every day, I'm not socializing the way I had been, and I don't have events to go to. Whatever it is that I want will be here when the time comes that I need it again. So I use that as opportunities to talk to myself, and I encourage you again to be very much in communication with yourself. With that said, all of that will help you get through the holiday season in the best possible way. And of course, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. This is my social media profile and handles. Please connect with us. We have so much great information that's out there, from budgeting to everything you can imagine on credit and debt. We're very active on Twitter and Instagram, certainly Facebook and LinkedIn for professional purposes. And we are thrilled to connect with you in any way, shape, or form. With that said, I'm going to turn my camera back on, and this way we can reconnect again in face-to-face through Zoom, and you can see me. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I know we rushed a little bit through it. It is a lot of material, and we went from very basic to a little bit more complex in terms of budgeting and the holiday season, but it is important information to keep in mind when you're doing your budget, that a lot of it really has to do with your mindset and your sense of control and your ability to be accountable to yourself and your family during these times.
Thanks, Leslie. That was great. I will remind everyone, if you have a question, you can use the chat box here, or you can also email info@savvyladies.org. And Leslie, the first question that we have for you is saying, I try to make a holiday budget every year, but I usually add a few more small purchases than I planned, and I tell myself that just a few small purchases of $20 extra won't break the bank. But I know these purchases can add up, and I do want to avoid that this year. How can I make myself accountable and actually stick to a budget this year? Do you have some tips?
I do, and one of the things I think is important is your recognition of the fact that you tend to go over budget. So I might leave yourself some room in your budget to do so. Maybe your over budget fund, I might call it, and if it's $20 or $40 or $60, leave a little over budget fund so that you give yourself a little breathing room should you go over budget. If you don't go over budget, then you can take that money and place it back into your emergency fund, or some other, you can donate it, or you can put it in an investing tool. But be aware that you already know that you have that issue, that tendency. So you could do that, or you could under budget for costs for your holiday budget. So hypothetically, if you had a $100 budget, cut the budget back to $80, giving yourself that $20 room to go over budget if that should happen. It does happen, and it's okay, and I wouldn't beat yourself up for going over budget. The question is how much over budget, and what sources of income are you using, what sources of cash flow are you using when you do go over budget. But creating a little cushion for yourself and giving you a little over budget fund might help you.
Okay, thank you. Another question says, I've never used Layaway before, but I'm thinking about it this year. Do you have any advice? for using Layaway?
Sure, I like Layaway. If again, that's all part of budgeting. So if it's 0% interest and you need and want those items and you can budget X amount of dollars, that'll definitely help you stay out of debt because you're not putting it on, let's say, a credit card and then financing it. So I love the concept of anything that's buy now, pay later, where you have 0%. So if that's what's being offered to you, a 0% option to Layaway, I would definitely take advantage of it so long as the payment structure fits in your budget.
Okay. Thank you, Leslie. Another question says, although I anticipate being able to pay my holiday credit card bills in full because I'll stick to a budget and not purchase what I can't afford, I still find it tough to deal with the high credit card bill after the holiday spending is done. Is there any way to plan for that in a better way? Do you recommend shopping throughout the year?
I didn't hear the last part. Do I recommend?
Shopping throughout the year. I guess spreading out shopping the year.
Yeah, I do recommend spreading things throughout the year. One of the things you can do, though, is, you don't have to wait for your payment due date to make the payment to your creditor. If you charge something, you can start making smaller payments, let's say on a weekly basis, to keep the balance of your credit cards down. Nobody says, there's no requirement that you only pay the bill on the due date. So you can pay it earlier, you can pay it more often, and that will definitely keep the balance down and will certainly keep interest down. If you want to buy, let's say, over the summer for the holidays, so long as you can ignore the holiday ads and the holiday, the shopping suck, if you could avoid that, then buy early. There's nothing wrong with buying early and being prepared. Again, it's all about budgeting and making sure that within your budget that you're able to do that. You could also, if you have cash flow, let's say early on in the summertime, you might want to put that into a savings account where there's at least some interest growing on that, so that by the time you go to use the money, that you have that it's grown a little bit.
Okay. Thank you. Great tips there. I think we have 2 more questions for you. This next one says, in the past, I've used cash as a way to stick to a budget when I'm shopping in store. Since I'll mostly be shopping online this year, do you recommend using a debit card?
So if you typically use cash, you could do one of 2 things. You can use your debit card, or you could use if you use a credit card, you just pay the bill right away. So you charge it and pay it. And this way there won't be any interest or anything on it. So that's an option too.
Okay. And Leslie, I think this is the last question for you. And it's starting off saying, thank you for these very practical tips. And I'm especially grateful that you talked about finances and emotions. I like the tip that you gave about taking a moment to pause and telling yourself that I'm not going anywhere, so I don't need to be purchasing this. Are there some other things that I can say to myself in those moments to encourage myself to not purchase something I'm thinking about?
Yes, I can give you some tips that I use when I'm looking at online purchases. So very often in the evening after work, I'm sitting on my couch watching TV and I have my laptop on my lap. So I'm always with the computer. So at night, I'm looking through all the shopping stuff that I don't don't have time for during the day. I often will leave it in a cart and not purchase it. So if you could leave it and then come back to it and decide a couple days later, do I really need this? That's a great way to control your spending. Don't impulse purchase right away. Put it in the cart and let it sit there for a few days, to go back to that cart and say, do I really need this at this time? Because sometimes the impulsivity of the purchase is because you see it, like it, want to buy it, and it's super easy to do so. Once you see it, you like it, and you give yourself a chance to decide if you really need it, your mindset might change a day or 2 later, and you might find out that you really don't need it or don't want it. There's lots of things are on sale now. And again, I say to myself, where am I going? What am I doing? Do I really need this? And how is this going to impact my life? And I would, you know what, I just don't want to buy anything right now. That's often what I say to myself. I just don't want to be buying anything right now. Now's not the time to be spending. That's something that I often say over and over. It's just not the time to be buying right now. And that's not because of lack of money. It's also because it just makes sense to remind myself that that's not what the priorities are right now.
Yes, that is so helpful, and I'm definitely going to be telling that to myself. And I want to thank you for sharing those tips with everyone. They were
Don't be afraid to talk to
easy.
yourself. It's totally okay to have the conversation in your head about, it doesn't make you crazy. It just makes you practical about, do I really need this? Do I really want this? What's the use of this? And does the cost of this item, and what is this item going to do for my life right now under the circumstances? And I think, for at least for myself and for many others, we've come a really long way this past year, and we've seen what's most important. And when you prioritize the importance of things in life, it's not necessarily the material things. It's more about ways to give back. So, for you and your lives, I'm not judgmental on your purchases by any stretch of the imagination. If you feel you need it, want it, and can buy it, then go for it. But start to talk to yourself and say, even talk to your significant other, do we really need this? Is this something that we should be purchasing right now? Start questioning your purchases before you make them, and see how it fits into your life and whether it enhances your life that much that it was worth the purchase.
Yes, great advice. Thank you so much, Leslie. I want to thank you for giving us some really great tips today and sharing all of this helpful information. Leslie's contact information is here on the slide, and we will also be sending this out to everyone, so you'll get it in your inbox soon. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you so much, Leslie. It was an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much. Stay safe and healthy, everybody, and happy holidays. Enjoy the holiday season with your families.
Yes, you too, Leslie. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.